So yesterday, I was talking about how we discovered that Castle Conflict has a lot of memory being loading now that wasn't loading before, and that was causing us a decent amount of problems. One of the things that I'm doing to solve this is essentially I'm going to make it so that you have less, or your textures are not loaded all at the same time. So basically, here's kind of what happens inside of Cocos 2D. And this is a bit of a technical explanation, so if you haven't used the iPhone SDK or worked in Xcode, this might not necessarily make the most sense to you. But basically what they do is the very first thing they do is they load a UI image from the path you provide for your texture. And this is where this could take up a certain amount of data. It's all loaded by Core Graphics. They then take this UI image and basically jam all the pixels into it into a data object. So yesterday I was talking about how they were mallocating 1024 by 1024 by 4. That's what this data object over here is going to be. The next thing that they do is they then use this data object to create an OpenGL texture. So you can kind of see we've got three distinct steps before we've gotten an image off the file or off the disk into OpenGL into memory. Now there is also the potential for a second data object. One of the things that we did to optimize memory, since our textures are low color, that's why they're so small in size, is we actually reduced our bit depth on our textures to 16-bit versus 32-bit. So instead of having a 1024 by 1024 texture be 4 megabytes, it should only be 2. So this should cut our texture usage in half. Now there's a problem with that. Cocos under the hood allocates this UI image, gets its 4 megabyte data object, which is the pixels from the image, then it takes that data object and compresses it into another data object. So for a little bit of time in memory there, we actually have 6 megabytes of texture memory, which means that while this texture is smaller, it's actually taking up more space in memory. Now, obviously, this is all based on my understanding from reading their code and following along on instruments, so I could be mistaken along the way. But basically, we have 6 megabytes loaded at this point in time. Then the 2 megabyte object is getting passed into the OpenGL ES texture after the 4 megabyte one is freed. I've noticed there seems to be a bit of latency between when the memory is freed and when it actually is freed inside the system. So inside instruments, this is what it should look like. I load one texture, UI image, data, texture, GL texture. Then this data should be gone, this image should be gone. Then I load another one, UI image, data, GL texture. But inside of instruments, the data from the previous one is still alive at this point. And so basically what's happening is that one of the problems we're running into isn't so much how much memory we're loading, it's when we're loading this memory. We have, when we're loading our player unit skins, we're loading in, pardon me, we're loading in 2 textures per side of the map. And the reason for this is because the computer, when you're playing multiplayer, we want to make sure you still have the ability to choose your texture or your skin and it'll show up properly in the game. But since if you're the guest, you're on the right side of the screen, we had to have each skin know about the left side of the screen and the right side of the screen. So we have our medieval skin, which is the one that anyone who's played the game has seen so far. We have our new Egyptian skins, which both have the same unit sets but different castles. One has a pyramid and one has a temple. And basically when these are loaded into memory, right now it's loading the textures for each one. Now this wasn't a problem before because, again, we had 2 512 by 512 textures, one for each unit set, left and right, and then a 512 by 512 texture for the castles. And this was all we would load into memory. So we had 4 megabytes. And on the iPhone with 20 to 25 megabytes and our game not requiring a lot more assets, that was fine. But now that we're up to 1024 by 1024 textures per side, all of a sudden what was 4 megabytes is now 10. Furthermore, we have the additional problem that these don't always stay in memory because the player can change their textures, they can change their skins. So basically the way I'm going about optimizing this is making sure that instead of loading everything at once, I'm loading it when it's needed, which is what the iPhone recommends you do anyways. And this is called lazy initting. So if you look at this file here, this is a new loading scene. And I'm kind of sad I have to do this because I really like the fact that we didn't have a lot of loading screens in Castle Conflict before. But in order to be able to fit in these new features, there's just no way around it. Luckily, the loading time is pretty quick. I imagine it'll be something like 2 to 3 seconds, so the players won't be seeing this for very long. And it should be quicker after they've played the first level. What basically you can see here is I'm just calling into these variables. The castle skin, the unit skin on the left side, making sure the texture exists in memory, then the castle skin, unit skin on the enemies, making sure their texture exists in memory. And the reason I got to do this differently is because the player can choose their skin. So they might have the castle skin, and the enemy might have the temple skin. And then all of a sudden, when the player, or if it was loading both of those, it'd have to load in the 4 1024 by 1024 unit textures, because the castle uses the medieval units, and the Egyptian one uses the Egyptian units. But now it only load in 1 1024 by 1024 from the castle skin and 1 1024 by 1024 from the unit skin, or from the temple skin. Furthermore, I've gone through all of our textures and checked to make sure that they're all properly optimized in terms of space. So for example, that's not a good example. We have a texture in here called ConHUD, which stands for consistent HUD. These are the things that don't change. And it's 288 by 176, which in memory will become 512 by 256. So I sent a whole bunch of messages to my artist this morning, telling him about all these textures that were possibly more optimizable, and hopefully that's going to get dealt with pretty quick. So between this more efficient loading, and obviously we're going to have some unloading as well, plus reducing our texture sizes, we should be able to get past these memory issues. Now there's one other thing I'm going to try, I haven't looked into as much detail yet, and that's using PVR textures. PVR is a format that basically the iPhone's optimized to use, and Cocos 2D does have some support for it. So I'm going to be looking into that later today, and hopefully the combination of these three things will actually make the game not only run properly, but it'll make it run possibly even better than before, because we're actually not just saying, oh, everything works, that's great, let's not look too detailed into this. Although one of the things I did notice is every single texture that's not optimized right now are ones we've added to in this update, so looks like we were doing pretty good before. So basically, this is going to be lazy initialized. Oops. So inside my player skin, what I want to have is a unit skin path and a castle skin path. And when I'm loading it from XML, I don't want to do that. I want to say unit skin equals that. And that's supposed to say path up here. All right, and now I'm gonna have to make these. So just like that, whenever it's asking for this castle skin, instead of loading it from the XML right away, it's loading it here. And that way, until it's used, it won't be memory. Oops. And then we just need to release our